Real stories of werewolves, of Dogman history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories. Welcome to Halloween. Tonight we've got two classic Dogman tales about the 2 days before All Hallows Eve. But first, it's another track from our all-new Halloween album. This one is performed by Those American Girls. The blonde one is Debbie. She's my favorite. You can find links to the album in our description. Take it away, ladies.
Trick-or-treating, looking for the sweets, Halloweening for something to eat. One lady gave me Grey Poupon, another gave me Spam. When someone gave me Pasta Fizzle, I couldn't understand. I want sweets, it's Halloween. Needs a Mandy, I want candy. Give me a treat, or I will trick. I'll drive you nuts, I'll make you sick. For I'm a witch, and I've got powers. I'll make you itch for 20 hours. I want sweets, it's Halloween. Needs a Mandy, I want candy. Give me a treat, or I will trick. I'll drive you nuts, I'll make you sick. For I'm a witch, and I've got powers. I'll make you itch for 20 hours. I want sweets, it's Halloween. Needs a Mandy, I want candy. I want sweets, it's Halloween. Needs a Mandy, I want candy.
2 nights before Halloween, a Dogman story. Dear Scary Stories, I have a werewolf or Dogman story that's been passed down in my family for a few generations. My father and grandfather told it to me and my sister, and they told us the story had been told to them by my great-grandfather and grandmother, who were both gone before I was born. My great-grandfather and grandmother owned and ran a family farm until the day they died. My grandfather and father converted the property to a sort of a country estate. They call it a ranch, but it's basically manicured lawns leading to fairly wild little forests and a small lake that they put fish into from time to time. We also have a cave system on the property, or under it, and that's the only part of this land I ever was personally interested in. Ever since I was a kid, I was an amateur spelunker. I still have not explored all the caves, which I think extend past the edge of our property, although we have not officially yet mapped it out. I don't want to give out details about that because I would be identifying the place, and I want to keep this anonymous, at least for now. I have not asked the permission of any of my relatives to tell this story. This is only my point of view, but I'll try to get the facts straight as they've been passed down to me. On Halloween, everyone knows that the veil between the realities is supposed to become much thinner, but not everyone knows that the other side is supposed to be a lot more organized in their approach to this holiday than we are on this side. For instance, from their side, the veil is always pierced first by a vanguard, warriors who can open the portal and then guard it through the holiday, allowing safe passage here and back for things that we can't even begin to understand at this stage in our evolution. And it's not just that, but the holiday is different every year for them. The procedures and rituals differ. And we were warned, each generation of our family, that when Halloween falls on a Wednesday, beware the guardians of the portal. And the reason this story gets passed down in such an earnest way in my family is that there's a general agreement in all generations prior to mine that the portal, or the thinnest spot between the worlds, exists on our property. My great-grandfather, grandfather, and father all agreed that the portal between dimensions exists in a cave system underneath where we live. Now, the land has a natural spring on it, water that flows up from the earth. By the later 1950s, when the farm shut down, they had figured out how to use it to irrigate the garden. But back then, it was a spring that they would get water from using buckets, and the spring was located close to the main entrance of the cave system. Great-grandma would say a prayer of thanks when taking water, but would say an extra blessing around All Hallows for any spirits who may have been passing through the area. This time, 2 days before Wednesday Halloween, when she said her usual prayers and blessings, she was met with a sound of something growling at her from some unseen source. She finished her business as soon as she could and began walking back to the farm as quickly as she could without spilling water from either bucket she was carrying. Soon, the growling was coming from all around her, and she knew the woods were filled with hostile spirits on this day. If it wasn't that, then she was surrounded by a pack of hungry canines of some sort. No matter how you slice it up, she was in trouble. Eventually, her pursuers revealed themselves, slowly walking out into the path behind her, then darting away quickly. They were wolves, but the brightest and largest white wolves she had ever seen. They seemed unnaturally bright, yet they were not albino. Their eyes were as dark as night and sparked with emotion. She sometimes saw 3, maybe 4 of the creatures as they would trot out into the path, then zip behind a tree or dash from behind one bush to behind another. She thought there may have been many more of them, or perhaps just the 3 or 4, but she was terrified and had to mentally force herself to breathe slowly and keep walking toward home. As she came to the edge of the patch of trees and looked toward the farm, she saw her husband, my great-grandfather, and she called out to him. According to what my great-grandmother is supposed to have said, great-grandpa grabbed his weapon and ran directly toward her, pointing it in her direction. He seemed to be aiming at her. She thought he had lost his mind, that perhaps he was enchanted by the wolf spirits who were menacing her. Unable to take the situation, when he used the instrument in his hands, she fainted right on the spot. The way my great-grandfather told it, however, was supposedly that after his wife called to him, he looked up and saw her at the edge of the trees, same as in her version of the story. But what she didn't know at the time, what she couldn't have known, was that standing just behind her, and apparently getting ready to grab her, my great-grandfather saw the wolves, the white wolves. He said there had to be 6 or 7 of them, and he said they were standing up on their hind legs and creeping deliberately toward great-grandma. He said he fired over their heads, and his wife fainted. The creatures retreated and watched from the woods as he came and carried her back home. Great-grandpa said they looked like wolves, but they were not wolves. They were spirits or sprites of some kind. He is supposed to have said they had the look about them of the most evil sort of fairies. And so, from that day forward, my family has had all sorts of precautions about years in which Halloween falls on Wednesdays, and one of the most off-limits of places would be the natural spring, and of course the cave system from which it emerges. The Monday before Halloween is as important a day as there is to my family. Halloween falls on a Wednesday this year, and I'm away at college thinking about my family and hoping that they are well. 2 days before Halloween, in a year in which the holiday falls on a Wednesday like this year, is a frightening time for us. The vanguard of a Wednesday Halloween, or the most terrifying of all. In these years, the vanguard are what you would call Dogmen. They tear through the veil, howling and barking and growling. Then they tear through the cave system and make a mess of anything in their path up above, while other vanguards will remain in hiding, guarding the cave and never harming anyone except in the most drastic of circumstances. The Dogmen don't care what they destroy. They don't care if their howling draws attention to themselves, as they enjoy a fight and gain status in their tribe for being destructive. For this reason, I was never allowed near the cave system around Halloween all through my life. Not even on the non-Dogman years. I was told to respect those people and to steer clear of them. I want it known that I do not believe one single word of any of this. I'm pretty sure the cave system on Halloween, or 2 days before Halloween, is exactly the same as it is on any other day of the year. I'm not saying I don't believe in multiple universes, since science and math say they are likely to exist. I'm also not saying I don't believe there might be something to Halloween being a special kind of time. I'm just saying I don't believe Dogmen overrun our family cave on Halloween. I think there probably is some kernel of truth which started these stories, but that they must have been greatly exaggerated for a reason which most likely no longer survives. Perhaps believing these stories provided some kind of value to my family in the past, but I don't see how a remnant superstition can help us in the present or the future. One day, with luck, this land will be mine, and on that day, I will begin work toward a study and mapping of that cave system, and we will go there armed with cameras and recording equipment of every sort possible, and we will document what happens every single second on the day, 2 days before Wednesday, Halloween.
OMG! Join Scary Stories creator Peter Bernard in... Does that say Boxburg? Where is that, yo? Oh wait, down here it says Peter's gonna be at the Northeast Comic Con with Billary West from Futurama and Akira Takarada from Godzilla. Why was it telling me to say he was in Boxburg? Why would someone want to go to Boxburg if they could go to the Northeast Comic Con instead, yo? LOL, whoever wrote this script sure is silly, yo. LOL. That's Thanksgiving weekend after you're done with your tofurkey. Don't miss it.
The summer's over, face of deer. It's that hoodie time of year. And you know times are never dull when you got the hoodie with the scary skull. Scary skull. Scary skull. Scary skull. Hoodie, hoodie, skull. Hoodie, skull. Scary skull. Pull over hoodie. Wear a toe string, it's a goodie. You can buy it without a prescription. Just follow the link in this video's description.
The day before Halloween. Some people I know have a fear of Halloween, or at least an aversion to it. Me? I love Halloween, but I've got a deadly fear of the day before Halloween. And it's all because of the Dogman. Back in the early 80s, my wife, who I will call Martha, and I had just bought our own home in a nice suburban neighborhood in New Jersey. We were getting ready to start our own family, but none of our 3 kids were around yet. It would be almost a year and a half before that phase of our lives began. Back then, we were newlyweds and celebrating our first Halloween in our own house. We had noticed how much the neighbors seemed to get into the whole decorating thing, so we spent a little time and effort ourselves trying to make our house look scary, but not too scary. Martha talked me into also decorating the rear of the house, and her idea, I have to admit, was kind of ahead of its time. She has a bit of Halloween genius in her, to be honest. Anyway, her idea was that we stuff clothes with pillows and make them look like dead zombies or whatever, then dangle them off the roof in various places in the back. This way we could make trick-or-treating at our house a bit more of an event. We put signs up in the front of the house suggesting that treats were to be had in the back, and we had the side of the house lined with humorous tombstones. Then you'd have to pass the zombies hanging off the roof and eventually be rewarded with candy. On your way out, you'd pass our spooky decorations on the opposite side of the house. Considering we threw it together in about a week, it wasn't too shabby. But anyway, like I was saying, this is not a story about Halloween. This is a story about the day before Halloween. That was the day on which my wife noticed that the bodies on the roof had gotten messed up due to weather or birds or something, and they were at risk of falling down. She wanted me to go up and adjust them so that it would be safe for kids to walk under them the following night. It was already starting to get a little dark out, so I rushed a bit to get the ladder and make this happen while I could still see what I was doing. Okay, so I was up on top of my ladder, leaning over the roof, fixing imaginary zombies, when I heard a sound behind me, like some kind of a really large animal. I turned around, but already much of the yard was in shadow, and a chill ran through me. Whatever was making that noise was hiding in the darkness. Was it someone trying to trick me for Halloween? I wondered, but it sounded too much like a real animal for me to believe that idea. We actually had installed lights for Halloween, but I had neglected to turn them on before climbing the ladder. In my rush to get the job done quickly, I had placed myself into a bit of a predicament. I saw the shadow move, and I went right into thinking maybe that's what it was, a real shadow person. I don't even think I had read about them yet at that point. I got myself pretty scared. I decided I had to climb down the ladder even though I might be backing up towards something very dangerous to me. I naturally felt safer up high, but I was balanced on a precariously placed ladder, and I was anything but safe. I definitely had to descend, but I couldn't make my feet do anything. Every time I was about to move, I would hear another sound from the bushes, or I would see a shadow moving again out of the corner of my eye. There really is something to be said about seeing the world entirely differently when we're afraid. It's become something I work on with my therapist ever since that night, but at the time, I wasn't aware how much of this I was doing to myself. I mean, yes, I was in an unsafe place, but rather than behaving rationally and making carefully thought out decisions as to my next move, I was cowering with my knees knocking together on top of a ladder. I looked at the fake pillow zombie I was holding onto, and I thought how I might soon be a real version of that thing. Then I heard a sound that made me gasp and almost lose my balance. Something was coming out of those shadows. Whether it was a shadow person, or a living creature, or a human, I was about to find out. But what I saw was something from the none of the above checkbox. It was something that I had never heard of or thought about before. It was what is now commonly called a Dogman. But in 1980, I don't think that thing would have been called anything. I don't know if anyone ever saw something like this that far back. I suppose you would know better than I would, but certainly it was not something that had ever been on In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. This was not a Bigfoot. This was not a Nessie. This was not a space alien. This was a hairy, upright, walking, dog-like humanoid. It reminded me of a caveman from a kid's TV show, except for the dog head, which was absolutely the freakiest thing you can ever imagine. I've never been able to describe it adequately. The mouth moved so unnaturally, but I don't mean I thought it was a costume. I thought it was a real thing with a very unnaturally moving mouth. So now, I forced myself to start to descend the ladder in my mind. I watched as my feet did not obey. Then it was too late, as the dog was at the bottom of the ladder. This thing did not run with its arms pumping at its side like we do. It sort of ran with its hands out in front, like an evil character in an old silent movie. It sort of lurked more than it walked. Everything about it seemed sinister, ridiculously and cartoonishly sinister. It ran toward the ladder, and I braced myself, holding on to both it and the side of the house, ready for when the dog beast tried to shake us both loose. Except that isn't what happened. The Dogman grabbed a rung or two of the ladder with its hands, and I do mean hands, not paws, and the ladder shook. But then, rather than shaking the ladder more, the Dogman started climbing up. Fast. I hadn't expected that. So this was not a normal dog that someone trained to walk on its hind legs. This was some sort of monster. I had to make a choice, and I had to make it fast. Was I going to jump off the ladder and try to land safely beyond the Dogman? If I didn't jump away far enough, he might grab me right out of the air or hurt me with his long claws. Another option would be to climb up on the roof, which is what I found myself doing before I could finish the thought. I raced up to the top of the roof and looked behind me. The dog-headed thing was about to join me up there. Almost without thinking, I ran down the front side of the roof, meaning to jump off the edge onto a pile of pillow zombies we had on the front lawn. Unfortunately, I forgot about the string of orange lights I had previously strung across the roof, and I tripped as I was jumping. I missed the pillows and landed on top of a pumpkin man it had taken a day and a half to carve. The sound of this alerted my wife to run up to the front of the house. Feeling unhurt but terrified, I ran inside, pulling her behind me and locking the door. The second the lock clicked, she asked me what happened, and I suddenly felt all the injuries that adrenaline had prevented me from feeling until I got inside. I had a few bad bruises, but I had nothing to complain about considering I had tripped and fallen off a roof. I was too distracted by the pain to be able to explain very clearly what I'd just been through, though. I told her to stay inside and give me a minute to figure out how to explain. So Martha relented, but fate did not. In the next instant, something large banged into the side of our house. It felt like a linebacker ran full force into it. My wife and I were so freaked out, we ran upstairs and stayed in bed the rest of the night. We were too afraid to go downstairs for dinner, so we ended up eating a tin of cookies that a relative had given us. The next morning, I got up early and drove to a mall to get an outdoor lighting system. I wanted to be able to floodlight any area of our property and to be able to control the lights from inside. I had it set up and working just as kids showed up that night for trick or treat. Once I had the lights, I felt safe again on our property, and neither of us ever saw the Dogman again. None of my kids who grew up in that house ever told me about seeing it either. So I think that whatever that thing was, my first assessment of it hadn't been entirely incorrect. It really was a being of shadow in some ways. So I'm not afraid of Halloween, because at our house, Halloween is a brightly lit, fun affair where we get to interact with our neighbors of every age. But the night before Halloween, That's the night that always gives me the willies. And it's all because of Dogman. Bigfoot. Autumn migration or year-round habituation? Dear Scary Stories, when I went away to college, my parents moved to a home out in the country. My mother wrote me that she heard people walking around her property at night and wanted to install an alarm system. Then, one night, she saw a Sasquatch staring into one of the house windows. I realized it wasn't people at all. I asked her what specifically she meant when she said she saw Sasquatch, and she described something that had to bend down to peer into windows that went up 9 feet in the air. Needless to say, I was alarmed at these reports and wondered if my parents were in danger or if my mom was going insane. When I spoke to my father, though, he corroborated her reports. They heard large people walking around the house at night, crunching the fall leaves, and there seemed to be spots outside of several windows where whoever it was would hang out and stare into the house while the two of them slept. Dad also mentioned that he had seen the silhouette of one of them once, and it was every bit as tall as Mom had said it was. I urged both of them to get out of there, but for some reason they thought it was kind of cool that a Bigfoot was interested in them. Talk about being desperate for attention. I was initially going to go home for that summer, but an opportunity arose for me to join an archaeological dig overseas, so that's where I spent the summer that year. My parents had no reports of Bigfoot for those months, and so they thought the creatures had moved on. When school resumed for me in the fall, the sounds of Bigfoot crunching all the leaves around my parents' house returned every night as well. Both of them decided the creatures must be nomadic, and they must pass through that area once a year in autumn through early winter, then leave. They hadn't heard them in the summer, and they never seemed to come around once snow was on the ground, so it seemed like a logical conclusion to draw. I really didn't want to visit their new home that year in the summer when college let out, but I couldn't line any better things up, so I ended up going home and visiting my parents in their no longer that new home. It seemed strange visiting them in this odd new location and seeing them so used to being there. It was a little heavy for me, realizing the home I had grown up in was completely gone, and that I would never get to be in my own room ever again. I had known this consciously for a couple of years, but I think a part of me was still always thinking of home as that place which was now owned by someone else and which I would never enter into again. So I was in a strange mood and spent most of my first week there sticking to myself and trying to find some paying work for the summer. One morning, I got up before dawn and started looking through want ads online. I was sitting in this room they have with large windows that looks out onto the lawn and the forest beyond. I think it was late June or early July, probably late June. As I was reading my laptop, which I literally had on the top of my lap, something drew my attention out of the corner of my eye. It was a large, dark figure moving in the trees. I turned and stared at the location but saw nothing. Going back to my work, I once again saw something move. This went on for a while. I would see something move, then look over, and everything looked normal. I thought that stress must be getting to me, and I searched even harder for a job. I needed an excuse to be someplace other than that house, and I needed some funding so I could get a room of my own somewhere, anywhere but in that creepy location. Don't get me wrong, the house is nice, and my parents are nicer, But that location is haunted by things that I wish I didn't have to know about. So I finally got a job, and it required me to work a night shift. I'd be driving to work at dusk and coming home at dawn, but it paid fairly well, relatively speaking. On more than one occasion, when pulling into the driveway and the time just before the sky starts to light up, I was shaken to the core by the sight of some large shadow seeming to come to life and run away from me and the house. I'm saying it would look like there was nothing there but the house, the garage, the driveway, and some trees and foliage. Then, in the next second, one of the shadows would literally seem to come to life and sprint off towards the woods behind the house. These were 9, 10, 11-foot tall shadows. I knew what they were, and you do too. They were my mother's pet Sasquatches. They didn't just pass through in the fall. They were habituated on her property, and it was just that she only heard them when there were leaves on the ground. During the summer, they were too stealthy to make enough noise to be heard, and in the winter, apparently they were too smart to walk on snow and leave footprints behind for evidence. For this reason, my parents were both convinced that they had a migrating tribe visiting them seasonally. They didn't. They had an infestation of giant, primitive, proto-humanoids who could go feral any second and make them very sorry that they had allowed these creatures to habituate. This all happened 3 years ago. I finished that summer at home with my parents, but have never returned since. They visited me for Thanksgiving this year. I won't ever go back to that place, and they won't listen to me that they are in danger. They also, for some reason, think it's a crazy idea that the Squatches live near them year-round. Why is that any crazier than a migration? It's shocking to me how people can get locked into beliefs and value them more than the eyewitness accounts of their own family members. Nevertheless, that's how the human nervous system seems to function. And that's why my parents and I can't agree about whether the Bigfoot on their property are part of an autumn migration or a year-round habituation. Dogman in the Bennington Triangle, as told to Peter Bernard, read by your old pal Bigfoot. This happened some 10 or 12 years ago. I was hiking with a former friend on the Glastonbury Mountain Trail, the Appalachian Trail, I think. We had visited the ghost town up there, which had people in it. I found that sort of disappointing, living humans instead of ghosts. But as we hiked out of there, trying to get out of the park before dark, my former buddy started telling me really creepy stories about people who disappeared in that area. I don't know if David Paulides had started writing yet by that point, but these were those kinds of stories. The guy started telling me that the area is called the Bennington Triangle, and that it's like the Bermuda Triangle. And he told me some other story about how there's a boulder that traps people in a vortex, and there's a giant Bigfoot that squashes people for fun. And I had to ask him to please stop. I told him he could tell me this stuff some other time when we were far away from that place, but all I wanted to hear right then was how soon could we be back in the car driving away. So now he got me skittish, and every bush that moved or sound I heard was a giant Bigfoot coming to step on me, you know? And I was really annoyed at my so-called friend for putting me in this state too. So we made it back to this fork in the road where there's a shelter, and we sat there to rest and drink some water before heading back the rest of the way. I couldn't relax. I was convinced I was being watched, but I was telling myself that it was all just ideas that the other guy put in my head, you know? But still, I couldn't relax. So the next thing you know, just like a jump scare in a movie where the monster jumps out at you, you know? This monster, I swear it jumped right out at us. It was like us resting, drinking water, then us being screamed at by a big hairy man with this dog-like face. I used to call it a Bigfoot in the first year or so after this happened, but it had floppy dog ears on the side of its head and a mouth and a nose that looked more like a dog than an ape or a human. But the eyes looked like there was a soul behind them, just not a soul that cared much if we lived or died. The two of us took off running back down the path toward my car. This thing walked after us, but every time I would look over my shoulder, it seemed just about as far behind as before, or sometimes even like it was gaining on us. And yes, it was walking on its hind legs, nonchalantly, like it was out for a stroll or something. It looked large, but it didn't look large enough to be strolling at the same speed that adult male humans can run. I may have been experiencing some sort of Oz effect, or maybe I was just kind of in a state of shock, but that's what it seemed like I was seeing. Maybe it dropped to all fours and ran whenever I wasn't looking, then rose back to its hind legs and strolled when I looked, but I never saw it running on all fours. I never saw it running, period. It seemed really like it had an evil intention on its mind. It was very unkempt, and its fur was straggly and long and nasty. I don't really know how to describe it other than that. It had the worst qualities of a dog and the worst qualities of a human. It gave me the heebie-jeebies when I saw it, and it still gives me the heebie-jeebies thinking about it to this day. So, we made it to the car, and I sped out of there. I don't remember seeing it once we got to the parking lot, but I probably wasn't looking behind me. My friend and I started arguing the second we hit the highway, and our friendship was already over. I couldn't forgive him for joking around about that stuff that happened in that area. I felt almost like he conjured that monster, like he brought it upon us. I mean, that thing was a real animal and it could have done us a lot of harm. But in another sense, I'm certain it had a paranormal aspect and that he drew it toward us somehow through his attitude. Plus, some things about it just didn't seem to make sense. Like how it was able to keep up with us while not seeming to be walking that fast. It was definitely the most mysterious and the most frightening thing that ever happened to me. And that's my story, to the best of my recollection, about the time I saw a Dogman in the Bennington Triangle.
If I wear a spinny hat, will I look all hunky? Will I look like that handsome chap from that TV show, The Monkees? Everybody wants a woolen cat, the scary stories, beanie hat. Everybody knows it's a natural fact. The scary stories, beanie hat. Link is in this video's description if all goes according to plan. Available in black, which is like every color all at once, man.
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.